All right, what's going on, everybody? So you can see I'm joined here by a very handsome gentleman, also with a beard, a smaller, more clean-cut beard than myself, but still a bearded gentleman nonetheless. So we're here to talk from multiple perspectives, my own, but also a more educated perspective on a topic that I think plagues many collectors, but specifically watch collectors, because not only is this man an educated individual in a field to which we will be referring. He's also a watch collector, and that's kind of how we met. I sent out a listing via my channel, the Time Teller channel, that I wanted to speak to a psychologist, and he's actually a viewer of mine. So without further ado, you know who I am, yep. Jory Goodman. Who am I joined by today?
Well, you're joined by Tom Karsten, and I'm a psychologist. I live in Holland, and so quite a while away, I guess. Yeah. With a time difference of like 9 hours.
Yeah, and it took a little bit to coordinate this recording, but we made it happen. I'm very thankful.
Sure, but we worked it out eventually.
Yeah. So, what is your background? What is your specialty? I'll explain why we're talking, but tell me a little bit more about you.
Yeah, so I live in Holland, in the Netherlands. I live in Den Bosch, which is like a small city here, and I started studying psychology when I was like 18. So I went to university and I got my bachelor's and master's in psychology there, and worked a couple of years. And then it's quite common here to get another traineeship for a couple of years, and so now I'm a healthcare psychologist, which means that I'm on the one hand just educated very scientifically, and then on the other hand I'm a practicing psychologist. And so I don't really have a lot of specialties, but currently my kind of specialties are personality disorders, ADHD. And so with that comes addiction as well, I guess, and autism. I've been working with for the past couple of years. And I think to add to that, I mean, what we see in the field is a lot of people with depression, anxiety disorders, and just everything there is to cover, I guess.
Absolutely, and it's interesting hearing you talk about this, because I personally see a shrink. And a lot of the things that you mentioned, I personally have lived with: ADD, or ADHD, anxiety, depression at times. You know, these are things that I don't like to say I struggle with, but I live with, you know, and you learn ways to treat and live with it better. And I've spoken about this on the Things That Keep Me Up at Night channel, but here, because this is actually going to be uploaded not only on the Things That Keep Me Up at Night podcasts, it's going to be on that channel, but also the Time Teller channel. It's because a lot of the people that are watching this right now are going to be watch collectors, right? They're going to be collectors of things. And typically on my channel, if you go on YouTube and you listen to a watch enthusiast speak about collecting, they're usually talking about how to collect. They're usually talking about what to collect. They're usually talking about different types of collections, but I haven't heard anyone talk about why we collect and the feeling of needing to acquire that next thing. And the interesting thing is that in my own, and again, I have somewhat of a limited view because I can only go by what I see in my comment section, what people sent to me.
Sure.
I have an interesting sampling, I will say, of many collectors telling me that, you know, hey, Time Teller, you joke about watch collecting being addiction. You joke about how you shouldn't ever start watch collecting because it opens up this can of worms. Yeah. But it's kind of a real thing that I feel. And I know this.
It really happens, right?
Yeah. You get sucked into it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so what I wanted to do was not just talk about it from, you know, the Time Teller's point of view, because you guys already know I'm 100% a watch addict. I'm always chasing that next thing. I'm never satisfied with my collection. I feel like I constantly need to be adding to my collection. But there's some people who have a somewhat negative relationship with this, with the need to collect. Because the last thing I'll say before I kind of hand it over to Tom is I almost never have one of anything. The only thing I have one of is my woman, right? She's very happy with that. I'm monogamous to my woman. But everything else, dude, when it comes to pets, I'm a fish keeper. I have a lot of fish. I breed shrimp. I have 3 cats. With cars, I'm not happy with one car. We have multiple cars. With watches, oh my gosh, I have like 40 plus watches. It's like I have to. I feel like a collecting and learning more and seeing, ooh, maybe if I sample this thing or that thing. Now, the decent thing is I don't feel like it's controlling my life. And also, it's not really damaging me in any way. I'm not going broke. It's not ruining my interpersonal relationships. But some people feel very differently about this, and they feel like, I kind of need to get this under control because it's kind of affecting other areas of my life. So, Tom, I know this was a lot of information to throw at you, but what do you think is a healthy form of the desire to collect? When does it kind of transition into something that could be negative? And how do people get help? And what does that look like?
Yeah, and so in general, I think there are also a couple of risk factors for collecting and starting to get addicted to stuff. I mean, in the field we see collecting as a trait of autism. For people with autism, collecting and having complete collections. I mean, that's the thing that people with autism usually strive to have. And so, I mean, if we let autism, I think, be on the sidelines, I mean, I almost would say it's a life-loving trait. It's the watch collectors I meet are usually the people that are really into cars or motorcycles. I've been into motorcycles for a couple of years, into cigars. I mean, it's the nice things in life we like, right?
And it's also the desire to learn. There's always something to learn about and know more about, and it's almost never ending.
Yeah, sure. And as you mentioned, I mean, people with ADHD or ADD, one of the traits they have usually is a broad interest. People want to learn about these things, and I think the impulsive behavior that comes with ADHD and ADD. That can be a real problem. And so the broad interest gets really impulsive in that way. And so I do think in the most cases it's not going to be a problem because people just get very interested in something and they get a little bit obsessed about it. And, that's okay. But when it creeps into your day-to-day and you just can't function anymore, you get a lot of questions about people in your environment, just spend some time with us instead of your watch collection or your cars or your motorcycles. I mean, that could be a red flag sometimes. And also, I think money-wise, if you spend more money than you have, or you're flipping some watches in order to buy a new watch, and you haven't sold some of the watches, and you already are buying a new watch. I mean, that's kind of a red flag, right? It's not between the boundaries you've set for yourself in the beginning. So that's I think that's when it gets. Yeah, sure. So I think that's when it gets a little bit risky. Yeah, and I mean I've suffered from it as well. I mean I've started my collection with one watch. It expanded to 2 watches, and I had about a year to obsess about the watch I wanted to buy. I wanted to buy the Sarpa 033, and so I did, and then it got the ball rolling. It gets problematic quite fast, I think, with watch collecting.
And so one thing that I've seen personally when you bring up ADHD is ever since I was little, and this used to make my parents tear their hair out. My dad is bald, and I think it's because of me. Growing up, I was very all or nothing. Okay. I was very, very
Yeah.
all or nothing with my interests.
Yeah.
And I've mentioned it on the Things That Keep Me Up at Night channel very candidly that, my dad's a neuropsychiatrist. Hopefully at some point I can get him on the channel and we can talk about some of these things. But he kind of saw like the red flags, and I was put into testing very, very early on to see kind of where I was at. And he told me, Jory, you are susceptible to being pretty impulsive. You're susceptible to seeing things very black or white. You're very quick to be obsessed with something and then throw yourself into something like 100%. And then the second it becomes uninteresting to you, you just drop it like nothing. And it's
Yeah.
funny because I've seen that with myself when it comes to watches and watch collecting. There was I always knew about watches because my dad wore a watch. My dad's had a collection, right, ever since I was little. But I personally never thought that I was like worthy to own the watches my dad owned because, oh, these are expensive things. My dad's a doctor. He's like he's this established dude. I'm just some like young, like guy who cares. But then the second that I kind of opened that can of worms and I got the Seiko SKX, it was like I went from having one watch to getting a bunch of books on watches.
Yeah.
My bookmarks page on my computers were filled with watches. I had folders on my phone about watches. I was trying to not only acquire like physical watches, I was trying to acquire as much information about
Yeah.
watches. And it freaked my parents out because they were like, oh man, like here he is like throwing himself into this thing like this. It could potentially be bad. You know what I mean? It worked
Yeah.
out, but yeah, I see that in myself.
Yeah. And so one of the things you described as being part of ADHD is the hyperfocus thing. And we see that a lot, I guess. I mean, people with ADHD, it's not that they can't direct attention, it's that they can't control it at their own will.
Mm-hmm.
And so people with ADHD tend to hyperfocus on subjects they really like and they really lag and really have a hard time with doing like paperwork and stuff.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And so with the wonders in the world of watches, it's such a bunch of information. You can just learn so much about it. I mean, I get hyper focused as well, and yeah. So I think it's really easy. It's a real easy hobby to lose yourself in.
And so,
Yeah.
would you say that because there's something to be said about escapism? I don't think escapism is all bad, right? Especially with the way the world is now, where everything's so politicized and everything seems to be, so the news cycle with how vicious it is now, it's just negative thing after negative thing after negative thing. And so I think losing yourself in a hobby, especially one that really like watches, thankfully aren't super politicized. The worst thing I get is like once in a while I get comments with people being like, oh, you're a capitalist, like you're just a capitalist consumerist pig because you like what expensive thing. It's like, whatever, dude, we don't have to take it that seriously. But what would you say, again, what is a clear red flag of when like escapism into this hobby goes like too far? And then what would you, as someone who recognizes this and actually treats people and helps people, like what does that look like? What does the positive side of it, like the help and the ongoing treatment, like what do you guys do?
Yeah. And so I think the big red flag is when the escapism is your only coping mechanism. I think then it gets really problematic. And so for some people who haven't been taught in their youth or even later in life to adopt some coping mechanisms that are very effective for the negative situations you're going to be in, that's not going to be a problem if you have a broad spectrum of coping mechanisms. And I think for a lot of people that's just not the case. And so when you only have the escapism, it's almost being avoidant of the negative situations you're in, and you just focus your eye on Instagram and watches, and just not be there in the moment. Right. And so when it becomes the only coping mechanism, then it can potentially become very much of a problem. Even when you're not spending the money to buy watches, then the obsessive part about the shopping can get very problematic.
Right.
And so what we tend to do in therapy is broaden that coping spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the problems we encounter, and I think especially for watch addiction, I've been looking it up over the past couple of days, and even shopping addiction is still not a valid DSM-5 diagnosis.
Really?
So we have a system of diagnosis of diagnosing with the DSM-5, which is the diagnostical and statistical manual that has all the symptoms of every disorder in psychiatry. And shopping addiction isn't one of them. So we still have the drug abuse disorder. We have the substance abuse, and that's what addiction is very known for. But I think for the past decades, we have got people with internet addiction, we have people with gaming addictions, we have shopping addiction, and so watch addiction is just not on the list.
It's very specific.
It's very specific, and even the protocols we have, the guidelines for treatment are very much focused on not buying stuff, but just using stuff.
Right.
Yeah. And so one of the more effective things we can do with this is CBT. So that's cognitive behavioral therapy. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of therapy. It's a way in which we try to talk to people. So it's almost always just talking to people, even when you go to sometimes a psychiatrist, and especially in the USA, sometimes you get some drugs prescribed, but usually it's just talking.
Right.
And you're going to talk about what the behavior is that's not healthy. You're going to talk about what coping mechanisms you're employing at that point in your life, and you try to change that. And eventually you're going to talk about the negative thought patterns that occur with people who have addiction, because they often, don't feel that great about themselves, and you want to change that a little bit. Yeah.
So I got an interesting question. Sorry to interrupt. I had an interesting question that kind of stuck with me. This was like a week or two ago, and this person was like, "Hey, I'm a collector, and not just of watches. I'm a collector of things." And he was like, "In your opinion, time teller, when does this become hoarding? Like, am I like a hoarder?" And so what's interesting is like TLC, and like I think it's TLC. It might be Discovery Channel or something. They have that show Hoarders,
I think it's TLC,
where it's like it's like you see these houses which are just dilapidated, and it's just filled with rubbish and rats and animal droppings, and it's just like disgusting. But I wonder, like, is that like a gradient? Is that like a spectrum? And could people that want to collect things, is that like a prerequisite for like hoarding?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I mean, that hasn't been my kind of experience with watches and the people I talk to that collect watches, because the hoarding very specifically is about not being able to let go of things that have no value whatsoever.
Okay.
And so the real hoarders, the real people that suffer from that problem, what we usually see is that there are some unresolved emotional issues that they can't let go of. They don't have the coping mechanisms to deal with that. So sometimes just holding on to stuff can be a way of comforting yourself. The problem with that is if it's stuff that's just not relevant to anyone, it's just old newspapers that no one's going to read ever, then it becomes very problematic. And I don't think that's the case with watch collecting, because we usually tend to acquire a lot of things that do have a lot of value.
Right. Yeah. So what would you say to someone who is in my comment section who asks, like, or states, I should say, that I have this like watch addiction, because we throw that word around, addiction. We kind of throw it around as like a joke in this community, like, oh, I'm a watch addict.
Yeah.
I'm addicted to watches. So what
Yeah.
would you, as a therapist, as a psychologist, tell someone who comments, hey, I think like I'm addicted to collecting watches, and like I think it might be a problem. What would you say to them? What advice would you give?
Yeah. And so when it really becomes a problem, go see a therapist, I think. I mean, of course, it depends on the person, it depends on the individual and the problems they encounter. But people who get really into financial trouble because of this,
Mm-hmm.
they lose friendships over their addiction because they don't make any time for the people around them. Yeah, that becomes a real problem. And so when you're not dealing with that issue, it's just gonna eat you up, man. And it's gonna affect, I think, every part of your life. And when that's the case, when that starts to be the case, yeah, get help. Yeah, see a psychologist or see a psychiatrist, and usually we have pretty good results in bringing people back from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. As a psychologist, what would you say to, because I'm going to be honest, the vast majority, I think at the highest end, only 3% of my viewership is female. So like pretty much everyone that's going to be watching this, I think, is going to be a male. And a
Yeah.
lot of dudes, especially within my demographic, which is like 25, 35-year olds. And then I think the next biggest one is the age group above that. But what would you say to some of these guys that think, hey, admitting a problem and asking for help, that's weak. That's BS. So now we're stepping away from specifically watch addiction. As a psychologist, what would you tell these guys that might be a little bit too stubborn to get help?
Well, first of all, I would say if it is a real problem, really just admit that there is a problem and stop lying to yourself. Because sometimes we can get caught up in this world of being obsessed over things, and sometimes things really get to be a problem. And if it gets problematic, and just look at your life as it is now, look at the things that are going well, but also really look at the things that are really not going very well. And just I think just open your eyes for that, not lie to yourself. And so I think for everyone, whether it's usually healthy behavior or is sometimes it's not healthy behavior, it's good to look at yourself and look at the way you stand in life at that moment, and just look at what are the problems and what are the good things in life, and admitting to yourself that you really do have a problem, I think is a sign of strength, to be honest.
Absolutely.
Because it's much harder to say, well, I've got an issue, I guess, and I really need to work on that.
Right.
I think that's much harder than just say, well, I'm going to buy another thing, or
I'm gonna just ignore it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna put my fingers in my ears just to pretend that's not there. So I mean, that's not gonna work. And there are a lot of things to have a good life for, but I think sometimes you just have to look at the facts as they are, not lie to yourself.
And sometimes the only way to see the facts laid out in front of you is to talk to someone else. Because I'm going to tell you right now, when I was in the throes of anxiety or uncertainty or depression, I wasn't always looking at things clearly. And so it definitely takes a second set of eyes to see your situation, be like, hey, you know what? This might be how you're feeling right now. This might be what you're going through right now, but there's actually, a way to help yourself, and there's a way that we can help you, and there's a way that you don't have to be like this forever. And so and guess what, when you're in the thick of things, you're probably not going to be the one to tell yourself that. So admitting that there's a
Yeah.
problem and just saying, hey, I need to talk to someone like Tom, or, that's as I'm not the psychologist he is, but as a person that has felt these feelings, I'm going to tell you that that was like the best decision I made. Because when I talk to my shrink, it's not because of this like collecting addiction. It's not because of that. But what I will tell you is when I talk to him about, my anxieties or about my feelings of depression or this and that, it was like night and day from when I started
Yeah.
to speak to someone versus when I was just trying to quote deal with it myself, because I wasn't dealing with it myself because what I was doing wasn't helping. So
Yeah, and so I think for a lot of people, I think it's the other people around you that really talk to you and say, "Well, this is not working, man. Really need to see someone and just talk about what you're dealing with." Or, yeah, that gets the ball rolling, I think. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so to put a pin, or I should say to put a period on this, clinically speaking, do you think, and this is a loaded question because you're biased because you're also a watch collector, do you think that watch collecting is a positive thing that enriches your life or a negative thing? What do you think?
No, I don't think it's much more than a risk factor. And so I've been thinking about this because I expected this question, and I thought, well, let it just don't let it be an addiction. Let it be an addition to your life. I mean, make
I
sure
like
you
that.
have your
I like
yeah.
that. You need to
Make sure
write
you
that down.
yeah,
Don't let
but
it
make
be an
sure you have your
addiction. Let it be an addition. That's
yeah.
like the quote of the whole episode. Good job, dude.
No, but I was thinking, if you have your affairs in order and have people around you who love you, if you have a stable social and financial situation, which is, hard enough in the day and age we live in, right?
Oh yeah.
When you have that, you have maybe some time and money to spend on really nice things you want to acquire, but just not let it be your first priority. And then I don't think it's becoming an addiction as quite fast as it would be if it's your only coping mechanism just to buy stuff. Right. Yeah, and so I do think it's a very pleasurable hobby, and I think no, I don't think it's a problem per se. No.
Well,
but as you said, I'm really biased.
Yeah. Hey man, no, I'll take it. You heard it here from a psychologist. He said watch collecting is good for you. All right. It's good. So guys, thank you so much. Please in the comment section, give Tom some love because he really was super flexible. The time difference, I think it's like 9 hours, right? Over 9 hours. It's crazy time difference. It's in the middle of the night for him. And we missed a few times scheduling, but he made it work. And he's such a cool guy. I wrote on my channel that I needed a psychologist. He hit me up right away. You can see he's incredible. And hopefully, Tom, if you're up to it, you can speak to me more about some other topics that we have coming up. I would love to have you.
Yeah, sure. No problem, man.
And so
it's an honor to be here.
Thank you. It's an honor to talk to someone actually educated on the topic. So it's not just some rambling idiot like myself. So Tom, for the watch collectors out there, what's your favorite watch? And what's a watch that you would hope to get in the future?
It's a loaded question, man. I mean, I can talk a lot. I can talk a lot about my field of work, but these are the really hard questions.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I don't really have a favorite watch, but I think the watch that I'm wearing now is definitely one of my favorites. I'm wearing the Alpinist right now.
Love it. That's
which is
my
just
one watch
all
collection.
Round,
perfect.
Yeah, it's just a great watch. I always thought it was an ugly watch, and so I always thought, I'm never going to buy this ugly thing, and now I have it, and it's my daily piece.
Love it.
So I wear it all the time, and so that's, I think, one of my favorite watches. Watches to acquire. Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, there are a lot of really nice watches, but I think would really like to have the Tudor chrono. You know, the collaboration they did with Breitling for the movement.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first watches that came out after that. I mean, I really like that. I really like the styling Panda. Of Tudor.
They have
yeah. It doesn't even have to be the Panda, but I really like that chrono.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Yeah. But it's an expensive piece, and so I would have to sell a lot of my watches to get that one. And I'm not going to do that. So
exactly.
Just have to keep on saving.
Exactly. Yeah. Have patience. That's kind of the name of the game. Have patience, because again, I'm not the psychologist, but if I'm to give someone advice about kind of a prudent way to collect, it's have some goals for your collection, and just also understand that the goal of collecting watches isn't just to fill up your watch box with as many watches as you can get. It's filling up your watch box with watches that you actually want. So take the time, do the research, learn about the things you like, the things you don't like. Don't just throw money at the hobby just to throw money at the hobby, because you'll find sometimes you might lust for a watch for a long period of time, but the longer you kind of lust for it, you realize, I actually don't know if I want this anymore. And that's happened to me with, I bought the Hamilton Jazzmaster Open Heart. It was a watch I wanted for so long. And I saved up. This was right before I became the time teller. I saved up for a while. I bought it. And then I never wore it. And it was because I lusted after it for so long that when I pulled the trigger on it, I was like, wait, you know what? I didn't really want this watch. I kind of just threw money at it. And so have patience, be prudent. If you think honestly that this is starting, this hobby or any hobby is starting to affect your life negatively, talk to someone like Tom, because you can see here, these people are willing to help. They're educated, they're nice, they're kind, and they're here to help you. So Tom, do you have anything that you want to plug, or do you have any social media or anything that you're working on that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, I do have an Instagram that has a lot of watches on it.
Yeah,
and I can send you the link as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll put it on screen.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Yeah, so I'm always looking for more followers because I have a really small Instagram channel.
Yeah, so we'll put it on screen. So just text it to me, the editor, slap it on screen. Guys, follow Tom, please. Tom, thank you so much for hanging out with me today, bro. We will record another one for sure. Not necessarily about watch collecting, but we're doing a whole bunch of stuff on this podcast, and it's a very new podcast. So comment section, give Tom some love. Tom, thank you so much, brother.
Great to be here, man.
All right, guys. Well, leave a comment, subscribe if you haven't already, and we will catch you on the next one. So stay happy, stay healthy, stay blessed. Talk to someone. Don't be stubborn. And we love you. All right, guys. Take care.